Hello, and welcome to the delicious recipe here on UPRN. It's Thursday night again, and I have a wonderful author, Tom Reiley, that's coming on here. And you can see him in the background. I got Hey You in the background watching the ones and twos, and out of this part, there is if you're watching live or want to watch live, you can go onto YouTube, and it's on UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials. That's one of the UPRN sites, and the other one is UFO Paranormal Radio. UFO Paranormal Radio. It's done twice. You can follow on my Facebook page, Del Lessie, and it's the delicious recipe that's also on there. And we have Michelle Williams there that is popped in off of Facebook. And if you have a question and stuff like that as we're going through this, and because we're on StreamYard here in and off of the other platforms there, you can write in a question. And if it shows up here, I will give you a shout, just like I did to Michelle Williams. And other parts about that is you can be listening live audio wise on all the other platforms: iHeart, iCloud, SoundCloud, Spreaker, the whole bunch of them. We're everywhere that podcasts are played, and that's through UPRN. So I would like to welcome Tom Reiley. Hello there, Tom.
Hey Del, how are you doing? What's the crack, as we say in Ireland?
Doing great. And Tom's written a book, and it's about the Protector, or AKA Old Ironsides, Oliver Cromwell, and a very influential character in history that dealt with the monarchy. He was a Puritan against the Roman Catholic Church, if I get that right there. And he came from a humble beginnings, a farmer that rose to power, a person that almost became king, I guess, king in name, I guess you would say, but never got anything. Castle. Now we go into that beheading of Charles I, and he was dug up afterwards and beheaded by the monarchy afterwards, I guess in spite. But that's just the short banter part of it there. But there's more stuff to go into. So, Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you've done very well there. You've been obviously doing your homework, Del, because that's lovely, succinct description of who Oliver Cromwell was. You've been obviously doing your
homework, Del. Sorry, I got that one on there. Okay, so
yeah,
let's go with your book, The Protector. Let's just sort of briefly go through that part there first about what that is, and then we can explain who Oliver Cromwell was.
Sure, yeah. Well, this is my fourth attempt at a book on Cromwell. It's my fourth book on him. It's my first novel. This is a novel, as it happens, and it's my attempt to right a wrong, to correct a miscarriage of justice, and what I consider to be a conspiracy. That's something that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah,
I hope. But yeah, Oliver Cromwell was and is still a monster in this country. He is, if you say the word Hitler, it's the same as saying the word Cromwell. He's well known to be a genocidal maniac, to have slaughtered innocent men, women, and children in Ireland. Civilians, much like Putin is doing today. At least these are the allegations that have been leveled against Oliver Cromwell. He existed in the 1600s. He came to prominence, as you correctly say. He came out of nowhere. There was a very complicated political and military situation in England around then. He was a gentleman farmer up to the age of 43, hadn't done anything significant whatsoever. And then when the king, who was Charles I, fell out with his parliament, Cromwell found himself as a parliamentarian officer in opposition to the king. He was a gifted general, as it turns out. He had no previous experience whatsoever of military engagement, but every battle that he went into, he seemed to win. And even if there was a draw, he was taking credit anyway. And he was convinced that God was on his side, as was the king, of course. But God seemed to be inexorably on Cromwell's side. So every battle he won, and it all sort of culminated when the king was captured. He was put on trial for treason against his own countrymen. And while Cromwell wasn't the most prominent instigator of this, the king lost his head. They chopped his head off in 1649, and then they ruled with Parliament, of which he was only a really minor member. And then they had to focus on Ireland. I was reading the other day, actually, that Ireland, we're the geography is we're very close to England. We're their nearest neighbours, and in the United Nations, I think there are something like 192 countries, and England or Great Britain have invaded 170 of them. So just to give you an idea of,
right.
That's the legacy. So we were very high up on the list, and we had been taken over by them from 1169, actually. So they had been in occupation in Ireland for a long time. So when this parliamentarian army decided to fight against the king, it's a civil war.
Yeah.
And the expression that we use here all the time is, this is England's difficulty and it's Ireland's opportunity. So we try and rebel during that time just to give them something else to focus on. So he, as the winner of the war against the king, they now had to focus on Ireland. So Cromwell came to Ireland in 1649. He spent 9 months here, and he was the first English commander who actually succeeded in taking the whole country. Up to that, there were pockets of Ireland taken by the English. The expression "beyond the pale."
Yeah.
Well, that comes from the Pale in Ireland, believe it or not, where the English settlement was, and beyond the Pale was where the Irish were. So that's where actually that comes from. We live in the Pale. I'm actually sitting right now in part of the Pale.
It's explained to people out there is that I'm here in Canada and Tom is in Ireland, so we're doing this across the pond. That's another word they use for that. Now,
absolutely.
Now, a part about this is that for Cromwell, the part that I'm looking at, and you're going to go and correct me on this if this is right. He was fighting against taxation, the monarchy bringing Roman Catholics into I guess Scotland, Ireland, and basically changing the people, and that's where the revolt sort of was coming back from. It wasn't like with the taxation and this. We'll explain the rump a little bit later of what that is.
But, sure. Yeah, I'm actually not going to correct you, Del, because you're absolutely bang on. That's exactly what it was.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
And the other part that I find this very interesting is that people always associate leprechauns from Ireland and stuff like that, but stuff that I've been reading about in history and really subversive history in that is that was part of the British monarchy to belittle the Irish people. Even though they were tall and big and strong, they would call them that they were short, stocky, little people. And that news went out there, and everybody would think, okay, well, leprechauns, that's Irish people, very weak, small,
and drinkers.
Yeah.
For hundreds of years, no, absolutely, no. That's where we get the inferiority complex, and it's not easy living next door to such a country who wants to dominate the world. They used to say that the sun never set on the British Empire because they always had occupancy in some part of the world where the sun was actually shining. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, those are the things he believed. He was very much against injustices. So when Charles I took over in 1625, Cromwell was only 26 at that stage. But Charles was a bit of a tyrant. He imposed unfair taxes, and when people wouldn't pay, he had their faces branded or their ears cut off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there were lots of people in prison because, he invented taxes. He was at war with different countries, and he wanted to, he was always trying to generate finance. Parliament would be called at his behest, and they weren't there all the time. Cromwell became an MP, and there was an 11-year period where he never even called Parliament at all. And then when he needed money, he called Parliament. And of course, when he married a Catholic queen, if you like. She was Queen Henrietta Maria of France. In Ireland these days, it's very difficult to look back at this period and judge it with 21st century eyes, because Catholicism means so many different things today.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, if you consider, so Cromwell's getting an education in the middle of the 17th century. So what he hears, and it's absolutely the case, is that throughout history, popes who represent Catholicism, Christianity, gave orders to their underlings to go out and massacre men, women, and children in the Crusades, in the Cathars in France, who wouldn't conform to Christianity. It wasn't a case if they wanted to try and convince them and convert them, they killed them.
Yeah.
And this is what Cromwell would have been, would have learned at school. So to him, his religion was very different. He became what's known as a Puritan. So that's a pure, your relationship with God directly was what he believed was significant.
Right.
Catholics had priests, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, a pope. So there's a hierarchy to get up there. And, as far as he was concerned, to God, this is a man-made, organized religion, and really nothing to do with the reality. And he firmly believed that, and it was the case, that Catholicism in those days was a political movement, essentially, and a very nasty one. So it's very difficult. I mean, Ireland has been for a long time primarily Catholic. And I was born a Catholic. I'm no longer one. But so it's difficult to get across that point where it was a cesspit of depravity back in the day.
Well, Ireland is split, right? There is sort of like you got the IRA at one part, and then you have the other, I guess, whatever, the South. I'm not sure it's East or West. I'm not sure if you could explain that, whatever. But it's very split. And the thing that's funny is that you guys occupy all the same island there, right? You got Scotland, Ireland, Wales. You got Britain that's there. I think.
Well, we're not all on the same island.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. So you've got Ireland, which is just the north and the south. We're the Republic of Ireland, and then there's the north of Ireland, which is in the UK. Okay. We're not in the UK, and there are lots of men who fought for our freedom, and eventually we did become free of England, and we have our own government, and we're not in any way involved with England now, other than just watching the show, because it's always fun looking at what happens there. So yeah, we're very different, but that's that came from a rising that actually did succeed. So when Cromwell was, if you like, he came to some sort of power after they won the English civil, and there were a few civil wars at that stage. There was one where when the king was captured, they tried to negotiate with him and he just wouldn't negotiate. And instead of negotiating, he decided to instigate a second civil war. So that was a thing. And that was horrible as far as Cromwell was concerned, because too many people were dying. Fathers were fighting against sons, brothers were fighting against brothers, So when they came to Ireland, anyway, this is the kernel of the issue, as far as I'm concerned. They invested sieges in various towns, and the town that I currently inhabit is called Drogheda. He's alleged to have wiped out the entire population, or at least 3,000 civilians. Now, that didn't happen, and this is where the conspiracy comes in, if you like, in this whole complicated story.
Okay.
And my contention is that he kept civilians out of the military engagement, but he did absolutely take over the country. And I would also just throw in that, in those days, that's just what they did. It's too far back for me to judge, because it's like a different planet.
Yeah.
The religious, economic, political situation, completely different to anything that we would recognize today. I mean, people in those days, they wouldn't even put on their shoes because they thought they were inhabited by evil spirits.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, that goes into that'll go into the next part about this. But
Yeah,
the part about this is that this is what maybe if I'm looking at this properly is that, and I because I see this in workplaces and stuff like that all the time, is that people that come from the beginning or the lowest point and rise to power, they understand everything. But people that are monarchy or aristocracy and stuff like that that have never ever known the lowest part there, their mindset does not compute, I guess you can use the word, that
yeah,
they understand anything. And so do you think that's where uh, Oliver Cromwell, the protector, he was what he was considered, what the Lord Protector, that the
yeah.
title.
I think that's very insightful what you've just said. Actually, and it's very key, and it's not something that I would have necessarily have. Certainly, when you pointed out, I think that's absolutely the case because he came from. He was a man's man. His man management in the wars was just that. It was, I'm with you guys. I know I've come from the same place as you have. I understand your problems. I
Yeah,
know your issues. Whereas the king is, coddled in a bubble where he
right.
has no idea what
Yeah,
the real person on the street feels, thinks,
right.
cares about. So yeah, absolutely. So that's a lot of the reason why Cromwell was so successful. He was
Hmm.
obviously very lucky as well. So just to maybe, I know we're going down different directions, just to finish
Okay.
off in his life. So
Yeah.
what happens is he subjugates Ireland. He wins the battle here, the first commander ever to do so. Then he goes to Scotland. He takes the Scots as well because you see it was a very precarious time. They had never gotten rid of the king before, so this is the first time in the history of England, when they started having monarchs, that the king was suddenly, or a queen. There was no king or queen. There was a parliament in place, and that's effectively a republic. So, but Cromwell didn't necessarily, want, and nor did he ever show any evidence that he wanted to be the top man or the job as head of state. But because people who were more qualified actually died in the war, and he just found himself, because he had such a wonderful relationship with the army was where the power was.
Right.
So he was conflicted, and he found himself. So when he came to Ireland, that was 1649. They chopped off the king's head in 1649, and 1653, he was invested as Lord Protector,
Hmm.
albeit, in my opinion, reluctantly. He overachieved, but he was kind of stepping in, as he said, on a temporary basis until they could find a permanent solution.
Right.
But he ruled with a parliament,
Hmm.
and his parliaments, he never actually agreed with them. But one of the things that happened, um, and just before that, and because you've mentioned the rump,
Yeah.
so before he became Lord Protector, the Parliament that he had been fighting for in all these wars, the Civil War, the Irish Wars, the Scottish Wars, they became a law unto themselves then. They figured, okay, we're impervious here. We can do what we like. And of course, power corrupts.
You're
So
right.
they got very corrupted. And Cromwell sees this, and
Yeah.
he's thinking, why did I fight for these guys? This is crazy. They
Hmm.
shouldn't be doing what they're doing. So one evening, when he had left Parliament, and there was a bill that was on the table to be passed, and effectively it would mean that Parliament would continue, ad infinitum. But Cromwell was very much against this, and they said no, they won't pass it. They discussed it again the following day, and he hoped that would happen. By the time he got home, he got wind of the fact that they were about to pass this bill.
Hmm.
So he runs out of the house, no shoes. He's in his socks, and he tears down to the Parliament building. Now, before he did that, he called up some soldiers, and he ran into Parliament, and he lost the head, and he called them all whoremasters and drunkards, and said, You are no parliament, So he dismissed them because he called in his soldiers and they couldn't argue. So now we're in a very strange situation. Cromwell, with no power, dismissed Parliament, and this was what's called the rump,
Okay.
because they were the bit that was left of the Parliament that had existed all that time. There were so many of them left, so it's the rump. And he found himself, having to decide on the future of the country, because he was, while he wasn't given, official power.
Right.
Sorry, I've gone on too long. But anyway,
no, yeah, this is perfect there, because this is sort of explains a lot more stuff that isn't in the part there. Basically, like I just see out of this, it's that you got to think he was the guy that was fighting for the little man, and then he became the big man to go and to slay the more dragons that he was protecting, that became more dragons on top of that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, when he's there, he's also conflicted by the fact that suddenly, when he was made Lord Protector, he had to make sure that the army were okay with this, because, the army had gotten rid of a king, and now he didn't want to become a king. They wanted to make him king. But he thought, well, why, when we got rid of one king, I don't want to take this position as a king, because the army would have been very, very disappointed,
Right.
to put it, mildly. So in short, this was 1653. He, decided to rule with a parliament. The first parliament didn't work. The second parliament didn't work. And eventually, he could never agree with them. There was so much bickering. They always took sides. There's factions within factions, and but he still managed to, run the country for 5 years. And in 1658, he died. He died of malaria.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And stones. There's ambiguous references to stones. I suspect they're kidney stones. Is what happened. And I've got a great story, by the way. Can I keep going? Is this okay?
Sure. Yeah, keep on going. Yeah. We got time there. The thing is that that, like I mentioned at the beginning, there is about how after he died, that he was dug up and beheaded, and because they just didn't like what he was doing. But like I said, he was like the David to the Goliath, I guess, in a way. But then he's characterized that he was also an evil man, that he went and slaughtered people too as well. So, and just wiped things out.
Well, that's my point. I suppose the point of the Protector, to be honest, is the fact that he didn't do that at all. I realize it's a novel, but and this is what I hope will percolate into the world, and maybe in 50 or 100 years' time, people will appreciate that he didn't do these things, and that interpretations of him in the future will take away this notion that he killed people, civilians, because he didn't, and there's no evidence, and I've substantiated that. But just before we, so when his life was so interesting, it's completely rags to riches, because he's ended up living in palaces that the king would have lived in. He's the only commoner ever to have ruled England as head of state. Nobody else had done it before. Nobody else did it since. And he came from a farmer to do this. Anyway, when he died, he nominated his son as his successor, but his son was a disaster. His name is Richard Cromwell. He only lasted about 6 or 8 months. They called him Tumble Down Dick in the end, because he tumbled down. And eventually, of course, Parliament was still there. Cromwell was dead. His son was no use. So they decided to engage with the king's son. So this is the king who they had chopped the head off. And they negotiated an arrangement where Charles II would now take the throne, but with reduced powers. And those reduced powers, to some degree, are more or less what the UK is now. The model is the same. So, Parliament run the UK, and the Queen is the head of state. So it all comes from that time.
Right.
So when the king came back, of course, he wanted revenge on the people who had chopped his father's head off, and they're called regicides, or the ones who had done that, signed the king's death warrant. So
Yeah.
they were all chased down all over the world, and in fact, lots of them made it to the New World. Some of them were chased all across America. There's a fantastic book that explains how they came. The king's men are chasing. There should be a movie made about this, chasing these regicides around America. They eventually escape. But anyway, the Cromwell was a primary major regicide because he took the throne, but he's dead. So what did they do? For revenge, they dig up his body. It was buried in Westminster Abbey in all pomp and ceremony, very, very expensive funeral. They hang him posthumously. They quarter him. Well, they hang, draw, and quarter. So he's drawn on a gibbet behind a cart, and they take his head off. Now this is where it gets very interesting. I love this story. So his head is then erected on a railing outside Westminster Hall in London.
Okay.
And it's stuck on a pike, and the pike comes up through the top of the head, and it stays there for 20 years, Del.
No way.
Yeah.
Serious.
And, yeah. In fact, Charles II is already gone from the throne by the time the head comes down. But the head comes down when a storm hits London. It's a very strong storm, and the head comes down, and there's a soldier who's doing some duty below. He's looking after an office. He sees the head, and everybody knows this head. I mean, they've all, the whole London isn't such a big place in those days, so they know that this is Cromwell's head. He puts the head in his cloak. He brings it home, and he panics then, thinking, "Oh God, what did I just do? I've just taken Cromwell's head, and people are going to ask questions." So he kind of hides the head, and he keeps it for as long as he's alive, and he doesn't tell anybody because they actually put they send a big reward out. Where's Cromwell's head? What are we going to do? And anyway, he bequeaths the head to his daughter on his deathbed. But his daughter has no issues at all. She just sells the head
Okay.
to the highest bidder, So then this guy is a bit of a charlatan, and he takes the head and, hands it round at dinner for his guests. And, they pick off a bit of an ear, a bit of his nose. Yeah. So, and then it goes into a circus, and this is Cromwell's head. And this is years of passing here. And then it goes into a museum, and by eventually, and this is after hundreds of years, it comes to a family by the name of Wilkinson, and they get a test done on it to make sure that it is his head, and it's because he had warts on his body shape, and in those days, they applied scientific methods to confirm that this was Cromwell's head.
Yeah,
it was, and this is the kicker. Cromwell's head was buried in March 1960 in the college where he went to in Cambridge, called Sidney, Sussex. And Del, I was born in March 1960.
Oh geez! So are you the re-envision the re-part of Oliver Cromwell?
You can take from that what you will.
No, it's sort of interesting about that. What you just said there is about how they had his head on a pike, because it wasn't the whole thing about London Bridge. Is that's what royalty would do to anybody that was there? They would go and hang their the people that were dissidents against the monarchy. They would just sort of post their heads on the bridge so that all the lower commoners would be like, hey, if you don't go and do what we want to do, this is what's going to happen to you right up here.
Absolutely, yeah. It was the done thing in those days. People were beheaded. I mean, it's a horrendous, concept to think of, and we've had, in recent modern times, we've had awful things happen as well. But in the country that I live in, and I know this is going to sound really strange, and I'm just digressing slightly, but right now, where I live, there is a church that actually displays the head of a saint. Well, he's made a saint now, but he was a priest who was beheaded. He was hung, drawn, and quartered.
Right.
And it's a huge tourist attraction. People
Mm-hmm.
know that when they come to my town, which is called Drogheda, they go and see the head of Saint Oliver Plunkett. So it's an
Wow.
eerie thing to see, but and it's very well preserved.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's the
And
kind of thing that, sorry.
I was going to say, no, that's just, it's sort of really morbid, but it's sort of really fascinating that people hang on to historical artifacts. There's so much there, and a part there too is that the part where I remember seeing uh, videos and stuff, not videos, but reading stories and that of
Mm.
how the English monarchy would go and punish, and the military, British military would punish people. Like hook up ropes to the arms and legs and the head of people, and have horses just go in different directions,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just they says that it wasn't bad enough that you can just stick a knife in the person's heart and just kill him. No, we have to
I
have him
know.
alive so that he feels pain. And that goes back to that whole Monty, no, was it Mel Brooks, The Inquisition? I think it was in
Yeah.
History of the World Part One there, where they're all
Yeah.
dancing around just torturing people. They got off the Marquis de Sade and stuff. I'm going off topic. We went
No,
off
but I
topic.
get it. I totally get it. That's exactly. It
Yeah,
was a very bloodthirsty time, and they did
yeah,
really horrendous things, And while people were still alive, as they were killing them, they would cut people's genitals off and stick them in their mouths, and they would,
yeah,
slice them open and make them
yeah.
drink a lot of wine, and then just slit the belly open. I mean, there were horrendous things they used to do.
Yeah, and there was the one that I was just watching there the other day with people that they considered that would talk in the town square. And geez, I can't remember the guy's name there right now. But what they did was they hung him up on the cross, and they took his tongue, nailed it to a piece
Mm.
so that he couldn't talk, cut off his tongue, then poured the blood in the wine back down his throat, and then hung him upside down. And like going, what are you guys doing? Like they,
Yeah.
like, this is like you wonder
Yeah.
where. Then you look at today with people with bombings and shootings and stuff like that. It says that's actually a little bit. Not saying that's is better,
No,
but
it's
I'm
an
just
easier way to go. Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
It says
Yeah.
instead of uh,
Yeah.
torturing a person for hours and hours and hours and hours and days, and like
Yeah, they were barbaric times. I mean, even when Cromwell was here, and the officers that they killed, they took the heads and they brought the heads to the capital, Dublin, and they put the heads on railings there and said, "This is what happens to dissenters. People
right, right.
who take the side of the king." I
Uh-huh.
mean, it was a very capricious time. It was very, there's so many things that depended on what side you took. And if God help you, if you took the wrong side, I mean,
Yeah.
after Cromwell left, we have an expression here. There's a part of Ireland called Connacht. We're broken
Okay.
into four areas, essentially. And, the expression that emanated from the time was you went to hell or to Connacht, because it was where the land was bad, and that's where Cromwell sent you, or you died.
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
that were your
And
choices.
And you got to figure that in cahoots, or I guess you could say in cahoots with the monarchy, the British monarchy, is the Roman Catholic Church, and they were just as big as thieves as the monarchy was with taxation. Like they were asking for stuff there too as well, and they were sending out their priests doing God knows what
Mm.
around the world, and following along the British the was that the Silk Road, the Tea Road, the Spice Road, because the monarchy was stretching out all over the place to go and gain
Yeah.
land, right? And the Roman Catholic Church was doing the exact same thing, and they had the protection of the monarchy.
Well, for a while they did, absolutely they did, and that's up until when Henry VIII came onto the throne, and he decided to break all ties with
Right,
Catholicism in those days, and that's when things get complicated, because now suddenly, and of course, Protestantism, which is the other main religion in this part of the world,
right.
sort of
Okay.
only emanated from the 16th century.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you've got Christianity, which kind of has covers both.
Right.
But look, it's all the same God,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
and in those days, it was such a huge aspect of life. Like I said before, I mean, you know, they simply and absolutely, completely believed that God was driving all their actions, you know, and then that was what how Cromwell, you know, firmly believed he was on the right path, because, you know, God was, you know, sending him. It didn't seem to be ambitious to me, but with every move he made, it seemed to have the blessing of the you know, a higher power.
Right. He
Whatever.
wanted basically he wanted justice for the little man, right? You would say that?
Yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely would. Yeah, I would say. In fact, that's what he espoused on a regular basis. He would also say, which was, I think, quite laudable. Really, he would say that he wouldn't meddle with any man's conscience. In other words, you know, he didn't really want to pay too much attention to what people believed. If they want to believe something, that's fine. But you know, where we had what's this is a strange name, but we had what's called the penal laws
Yep.
back in the day, and
Mhm.
that was basically, you know, mass could not be said in Ireland because of Catholicism and what it represented. And again, it
Right.
represented what Cromwell believed was a political entity. But he didn't really mind what the ordinary person thought. If the ordinary person wanted to, you know, think about God and have his own mass in his head, or whatever way it would work. You
Right.
know,
Right.
once it wasn't public, you know, he didn't really, and he had a significant policy of toleration towards religious sects in general. You know, he
Mhm.
readmitted the Jews back into England, and they had been banned from, I think, something like 1293 or something. Now that was also for commercial reasons, because they were very clever businessmen.
Mhm.
But you know, he also believed that the second coming would happen if he readmitted the Jews.
Mhm.
So his policy of religious toleration, it's hard to argue with him. But I have to tell you, there are, you know, the Irish diaspora around
Right.
the world. There's about 80 million people. That's 80 million people
Right.
who claim Irish heritage or Irish ancestry. And if you mention, if they're familiar with the name Cromwell, trust me, they don't say the things I say.
Well, okay, this goes into a part there because this is the delicious recipe. We throw a lot of things in the pot and we see how it goes at the end and see how it tastes. The thing is, though, is that from Ireland, though, too, that whole area, leprechauns, fairies, and stuff like that. What was the whole thought about that? Because that is a very big part of where the lore comes from. And then you have the church coming in and says, no, it's Jesus and God. And they're going about, no, this is old world stuff, old magic, and that. How does that sort of fit into his sort of narrative? Did he dismiss all that stuff?
Well, to a degree, there's a fantastic story that comes from that time, and I'm always a great believer in the you know, the older the reference, the more likely it is to have some semblance of truth or fact.
Mm-hmm.
One of the last battles of the Civil War, um, where the Battle of Worcester, which was in 1651. Cromwell is documented as going into, they were on the battlefield, and he met an old man in the adjacent woods, and he went in with his Colonel Lindsay was the guy's name, and he wrote down what happened. And the old man said to Cromwell, look, I've got powers here, I see things, and if you want to win this battle, you've got to give me, I'm only going to give you 7 more years of life. So
Oh,
Cromwell's, yeah, so he's, you know, he's young enough at that stage, he's 52.
right.
And Cromwell says, no, I want 21, because that was a fair age to live to in those days. And your man said, no, you're going to get 7. And Cromwell pleaded for 14. And the guy was absolutely adamant. He said, you're going to get 7 years, and that's it. So Cromwell, because he wanted the battle, he wanted to win, he said,
Yeah.
turned around, he said, okay, Lindsay, the battle is now ours. I'll agree to 7. So 7 years later, when they won the battle, and he became, so he died in 1658. There's this big, huge storm a couple of nights before he dies. Massive. It's the biggest storm that has ever hit England. You know, roofs were lifted off houses, trees were blown down like saplings, the rivers were flooded, and it was horrendous. So people suggested that was the devil coming for Cromwell's soul. So, when he died a couple of days later, there was never the same kind of storm. So there are lots of, stories associated with him, and that's a significant one, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not there's nothing really documented. His main thing, he did have visions when he was younger. He had visions that looked into the future. One of them alleges that he saw himself as the most powerful man in the country. But there's his ghost is certainly around if you want to go down that road.
Yeah, well, we got some time here. This is the part. It says, you know what? And I'm going to say that we only got like about 10, 12 minutes left there, and
Sure.
we're gonna do a part 2 on this, because this goes into the more paranormal stuff that goes into the very interesting stuff, because Ireland is filled with paranormal activity or stories and lore. And the part is that originally it says, I thought that you were living in the castle of Cromwell and you had the ghost there, and which is fine to be, but this is let's with the time we have left here, because we'll save that other part for the next time. But let's go into the part about your book, because I really want people to buy your book and read the stories there, because I just started reading it there. It was sent to me by Gavin there. So and let's go into the book and tell people out there what your book is about.
Sure, Del. Firstly, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. The second thing I want to say is I do inhabit a castle for most of the week, and it is haunted. And we've got had paranormal investigations done, and things have been recorded, and we have significant individuals who lived through the centuries who have been seen and witnessed by many. Thank you. But the book is, what it is essentially, it's a message from me. It's a novel. It's Cromwell's life in tabloid form. In other words, it's I call it all killer, no filler. It's when he was born to when he dies, and every event that happens, and it's incredible, really. He's led the most unbelievably interesting life. And he's not really that well known in your part of the world, I don't suspect.
Right. Yeah.
But it's crying out to be made as a movie, because he's called the protector in the end, as he protects his countries. But yeah, it's like I'm trying to get a message across that he was an honorable guy, basically. That he's much maligned over here. If you fully understood, what I'm trying to say, because as I said, my message is not really popular. But it's based on absolute.
Why would you say it's not popular? Because other people in Ireland think that he was a villain?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why would they say that?
Because they've been conditioned.
Right. And then this goes into a part that I've been talking about in my whole show about teaching in schools propaganda to kids, and then they end up grow up, and then they end up, that's the only way that they think.
Right? Man, that's exactly what you've just put your finger on. That's exactly. I picked up a book, about 2 weeks ago, and it's a school book that's on the school curriculum currently, and it's been taught to 12 to 15-year-olds, and it says that Cromwell came to my town, Drogheda, and killed 3,500 civilians. And he went to another town called Wexford, and he killed 4,000 civilians. Now, there's not a shred of evidence that would substantiate any of that, and no historian worth their salt would justify it or stand over it. Yeah. But that's what children today are being taught. So, and I just want to make a very significant point. You mentioned earlier on about the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland.
Yeah.
Like we have had atrocities in the north, and the IRA have been responsible for lots of those atrocities in the same way that loyalists have been. But Cromwell has been used as justification for atrocities, because it's believed that he killed civilians here, and what that does is it fosters anti-English sentiment. And it's 2022. We shouldn't be teaching children propaganda that originates from the 17th century. And you're absolutely right, Del. That's what fires me up.
Yeah, well, that comes to the whole part there. That's why when you look at how the kids of today are sort of growing up there, and they're being told, and this is what I guess the fight that's going on in North America there too, about education, and everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a trophy. Nobody gets first place, and this is a really strange time, because then that just teaches people that I just have to show up to get something. I
Yeah,
don't have to excel,
it's very
right?
good.
And
Yeah,
then you look at the other part about history. It says, well, then these kids read the history books that are there that are not actually accurate, and they believe what the history is. That's why I think it's so important to have people on that go and research this stuff and go and tell what the real story is, because today history is being manipulated and lost, or being subverted and blocked out, and I think that's a detriment to the progression
absolutely.
of humanity.
And
And
yeah, and one of the main aspects of that is, I mean, we're all patriotic, we're all nationalistic. At least I certainly am about my country, and I
mhm,
presume you are about yours. And what we do over here is we don't just record our history. Excuse me, we are inspired by our history.
right,
So it's these kind of things, and you need to be inspired by the right kind of stuff,
hmm,
not by stories that are made up, just to inflame Irish hearts or hearts anywhere.
hmm.
So, beg pardon. So that's my take on this, and I've got the evidence to back it all up.
I always find this sort of interesting. I always thought about the separation between the two parts of Ireland. It reminds me of the story here, or the tale in the USA, of the Hatfields and the McCoys, and because there was a sort of a disagreement, and they all the kids and all the things on the Hatfields, and that they hate the other people there unconditionally, but they don't know why until the two, a boy and a girl from each side there, they find and they fall in love, and now they're causing the togetherness to come together and to bring the
Yeah,
families together. And I guess maybe we're just waiting for that in Ireland, I guess, eh?
absolutely. And that's, again, we're living in 2022, and there are some traditions that die very hard, and we
Mm,
do have, the divide is still very, very clear. It's very
right.
obvious. There's no war anymore. There
Hmm.
are agreements. There's what's known as the Good Friday Agreement. And but when you look at, and maybe this is a conversation for another day as well, when you look at, the governments that are sort of, the custodians of this particular agreement. I don't know if what you know about English politics at the moment, but there are aspects of the Good Friday Agreement that are in jeopardy currently, because Britain are kind of isolating themselves in Europe, and they've had this Brexit thing where they're out of
Yeah.
Europe.
Yeah.
So and there's the Northern Ireland Protocol that protects businesses in the north, and that's under threat now. So all these things are very real, and divides. This is a time for reconciliation and peace and building bridges.
Mhm.
In my opinion, it's not a time for acrimony and difficulty. But I'm only a small pawn in a very big wheel.
Yes. Well, we got a few minutes left there.
Mm,
I want to thank you, Tom, for being on, and I will have you back on again, because we have to go into the paranormal stuff there a little bit more,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and
My
then also,
fault. My fault that we didn't do that. I'm
oh, that's
sorry.
not your fault. No, I go off on different tangents. That's what's fun about this. We just have a good time, free flow. So
Absolutely.
tell people where they can find your book, or your
Sure.
books, because you have several. This is your fourth book, and
Yeah.
where they can check you out and follow any of your stuff.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, the book that's currently out is called The Protector: The Fall and Rise of Oliver Cromwell. So it's not the rise and fall, it's the fall and rise. And that's interesting alone. You need to buy the book to understand what I'm talking about there.
Right,
And
right.
you get that book on johnhuntpublishing.com. It's printed, it's published under an imprint of Top Hat publications. Other books are called Cromwell Was Framed,
Hmm.
and another one was called Cromwell, An Honourable Enemy. So yeah, so all of those. I'm on Facebook. I don't have a website yet because I haven't really just. I'm too busy dealing with all the ghosts in the castle currently to
See that'll be our next show. We'll talk
yeah,
about the ghosts in the castle. That's where we
yeah.
this is where how I originally was going to go, but this Oliver Cromwell stuff was so interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And it's a part of history, and I think a lot of people don't understand and or don't care or don't or didn't know, right?
Well, interestingly, I know we're just keep an eye on me and stop me if I'm talking too much. But he was actually going to leave. The thing things got so bad in England, he was going to leave and go to America. That's one of the things that he was going to do, and he was practically packed up. There's a movie that's made, and it's called Cromwell. And at the beginning, he's explaining why he wants to leave and go to America.
Right. Okay. Well, this is our time is up for today. I want to thank you very much there, Tom, for being on here. Check out his book. Like I said, the newest book there, The Protector, the Fall and Rise of Oliver Cromwell. And this is the Delicious Recipe Thursday night at 7 to 8 p.m. And you can check us out wherever. And thanks to all the people there. Jenny Spencer, I give you a shout out there, and Michelle Millens for watching on, and everybody else that was tuning in. And you know what? Good night, and we'll see you all next Thursday.